Okay, am I good to go? All right. Thanks, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker of the day. This is Sophia Frentz. She is a PhD candidate in genetics out at the Royal Melbourne Children's Hospital, and her work is on mitochondrial diseases. She is also the Vice President of the University of Melbourne Women in Science and Engineering Group, and she's a total baller. Thank you, Sophia.
Alright, how are we going on sound? That sounds good to me. Everyone at the back can hear me, yeah? Alright, we're excellent. Today I'm going to be talking to you about sort of gender equality and space, right? Because when we think about space, a lot of the time we think astronauts and we're like Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, which hilariously enough, when I was trying to practice the speech, I actually forgot who Neil Armstrong was and I had to Google the guy that's not Buzz Aldrin. But general talking, we know that they're the first two men who worked on the moon. And the stories we tell about space are typically about men. They're about the dudes who go to the moon. They're about, Matt Damon on Mars. Like in fiction as well as in reality, like the guy in The Martian is this white dude. He's not John Cho, he's not Kerry Washington, both of which are films I would definitely watch, because can you imagine Kerry Washington on Mars? And Gravity was groundbreaking precisely because it starred a woman in the main role, as Sandra Bullock being in space haunted by George Clooney. But they're overwhelmingly for men, but the history of space travel doesn't reflect that. Although it still kind of does, right? Because we still haven't sent a woman to the moon. And NASA has kind of gone, we're done with the moon's over, it's so last century, guys. But we've sent like 12, I'm guessing, dudes to the moon. As you just heard, I'm a biologist, so sometimes I will say things that might not be that true about space. But broadly, they're quite true. We've sent something like 12 dudes to the moon. And just at no point was NASA like, maybe we should send a woman to the moon. Maybe that'd be fun. Maybe they could do some science up there for us. No, just a whole bunch of dudes. And it's also reflected in the way we still talk about space travel a lot. Because a lot of the time, people still refer to manned space travel, which NASA no longer does. NASA's full recommendation is that you refer to it as human space flight. But you'll get jerks, and Katie Mack, who some of you might have seen on Wednesday, always comes across jerks on Twitter who are like, but Katie, it is manned space flight. It definitely is. And it's like, NASA doesn't say that anymore. So if this is something you've been struggling with, the correct term is human space flight. Thank you. But this isn't something historical. This is something that happens today and constantly. Because Russian female astronauts, I'm just going to read out this title because it's ridiculous. Russian female astronauts were asked how they would cope in space without men and makeup. And the astronauts quite rightly responded, we're very beautiful without makeup. We good. But it's that kind of treatment and that kind of discussion, because this was a crew of 8 female astronauts that Russia is cosmonauts that Russia is training to send to space. And it's amazing because it's the first all-female crew that Russia has put together. And yet, in 2015, they were asked how they're going to deal without men. And their boss said, well, women might be no worse than men. Might be, not worse. And then he said, which is just, it's one of my favourite things. When you get 2 housewives in a kitchen, it just doesn't work out. And it's like, I don't even know where to start as to how wrong you are in that statement. Because it is so wrong on so many levels. And in case you think, Russia, they're very backwards. They hate everyone. Women, the gays, probably America most of the time. Russia's not a good place. When we sent a probe to a comet, the man who was out there talking about it wore a shirt covered in women in lingerie and didn't understand why this was wrong. Didn't understand why wearing a shirt covered in lingerie-clad women posed provocatively might send a message to young female budding astronauts out there that maybe it's not the most accepting environment for women. Maybe the men in your field will only see you as an object. And again, that happened in 2014. And to the researcher's credit, he has apologised. He has come out and said, I realise what I did was wrong, but the fact is, he didn't realise it was wrong before he put on the shirt to go on TV, on national television, that morning. And these are the kinds of stories we tell about women in space, instead of this kind of story. This This woman is Margaret Hamilton, and she is standing beside the stack of code that she used to send man to the moon. That is the code that she wrote for the Apollo 11 mission that sent Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon. It's really hard because I keep trying to go and say Neil Gaiman, and it's like, he hasn't gone to the moon. Come on. She also tried to correct a lot of bugs in the system that her bosses just didn't let her. She discovered that if you tried to start a pre-flight program while on a mission, you would just wipe all of your flight data. And her bosses were like, that'll never happen, Margaret. That's crazy talk. And then someone proceeded to do it in the Apollo 13 mission. And so she had to then work out a way to send all of the flight data to a spaceship orbiting the moon and then get them back home. And she did that. And she is fantastic. And that pile of code is as tall as her. And that's the kind of story we need to be saying. We need to be saying, you know who's amazing? Margaret Hamilton. Margaret Hamilton hand wrote this code because this was in the 60s and they were terrible times for computing. I am so glad I live today where I can just do a course online and be like, now I know how to code Python, rather than being like, what are punch cards and how do they work? Does anyone know what the name of the first woman in space was? Who said that first? Good job. Yeah, it was Valentina Tereshkova. She's amazing. She has actually, I think about a year ago, maybe a year and a bit ago, came out and said that she wanted to be the first person to go to Mars. Essentially saying, well, we can send people to Mars. The problem currently is bringing them back, and I'm old. I'm happy to die on Mars. Which is just the most amazing thing I have heard. She is someone whose name should be on everyone's lips. It should be Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova, but it often isn't. It's often just about the dudes, and we forget that there are these amazing women who are often still alive today and say things like, send me to Mars. I will go to Mars, it will be great. And then we have women like Mae Jemison, and this is sort of leading into a really important point about why the stories we tell are so key. So Mae Jemison was the first African-American woman in space, and she has said in interviews that she was inspired by Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, that she saw a black woman in space and she thought, I can go to space. Because that woman on TV is pretending to be in space, and that is excellent. And by telling those kind of diverse stories, by talking about women in space, by talking about diverse people in space, it inspires people to shoot for the stars. To shoot for the stars, right? To shoot for the moon. It inspires people to take those steps that they might not otherwise have thought of. And it brilliantly came full circle when Mae Jemison starred in Star Trek. And so Mae Jemison is one of the few people who you can have two pictures of her doing her job in space in very, very different contexts, which is really just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It's not just astronauts as well. Often when we talk about ground crews, it's the pictures of NASA where everyone looks very, very tired all of the time. I don't know if you've noticed, but whenever I see the pictures of NASA, it's like, oh no, no windows. Oh babies, get your vitamin D supplements, please. I do not like the look of that work environment. It looks very, very difficult. But then I'm also not a space scientist, so obviously not. These are the Indian women celebrating after the success of their Mars orbiter mission, which is a mission of a probe that is currently orbiting Mars that cost less to send to Mars than the film Gravity cost to make. Which is just so beautiful. And the pictures that came out after that success are these women who are not only just amazing Indian women, but they're amazing Indian women dressed like women. They're dressed in these beautiful saris. They're proud of who they are, and they're celebrating. They're celebrating because they've succeeded. And often, we're told in the sort of stories that are created around women in STEM, women in space, are you have to, play with the boys. You're a woman in a man's world. Wear some pants. But these are women in their saris, and they're so happy. And it's just one of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen. And it was all over the internet. And then we forgot about it really quickly, and that kind of weirded me out because it's amazing. They sent a probe to Mars for less than a film, which is just such an incredible feat. And the deputy director of this, Nandini Harinath, is the most amazing woman you've ever heard of. She is a deputy director, she has 2 kids, she, in interviews, is just like, yes, I want to be the first female director of the Indian space program. I will do this in like less than 10 years. I've got this. And she's so wonderful and no one knows about her. And this is like quite distressing to me because these women are doing amazing things. We have those role models right there within our reach. But we just don't talk about them. We don't tell their stories. We don't remember their names. We don't talk about the fact that Anushi Ansari, who was, she's the 4th sort of space tourist. She went to the ISS self-funded. She was the first Iranian-American woman in space. And she was the first female sort of space tourist. And she just kind of did it, and no one ever really blinked an eye or heard about it. No one really talked about the fact that Anushi Ansari has like done this wonderful thing, self-funded her way into space because her family owns part of telecom. And she's this amazing engineer, but we don't talk about the kind of women that do this. We talk about, Elon Musk, who's doing amazing things, but we really need to be talking about these kind of people as well. Because this is so true. When we ignore half our talent, everything's so much harder. When you forget about women, when you don't encourage young girls who like space to go into astrophysics or go into astronomy or become astronauts, then everything's that much harder. And it's something that people often say, but I don't think they often understand. It's like, if you're ignoring half your brain power, what are you doing? You have messed up somewhere, friend. Your life has gone very wrong, and now you're ruining science for everyone. We are not going to go to Mars. We are not going to make a better spacecraft very quickly if we've only got half the brain power, and half of that is just this giant echo chamber of men telling each other that they're very good all the time. This is Sally Ride. Sally Ride was the first American woman in space. She is also she's also unfortunately deceased. She had pancreatic cancer and died relatively recently, which is not good. She is a bisexual. So it means somewhere there's a list of notable bisexuals, and me and Sally Ride are both on it, which is very nice. But also, and I'm so mad about this. So first American woman in space, did it in 1983 because America was a solid 15 years behind Russia at that point in time. And there's still not a film with a queer protagonist about space and astronauts. Sally Ride did this 30 years ago, guys. I need Hollywood to catch up. I need the films where there are other bisexual protagonists that are doing these things. But one of my favorite stories about Sally Ride, and I have a lot of I love the idea of Sally Ride, the fact that she founded an entire organization to encourage young women to go into science. One of my favorite stories is when she was going on her first mission, which was a 7-day mission. A group of NASA engineers came to her and they were like, okay, so you're going on a mission, you're the first woman who was sending into space. You'll need tampons. How many? Would 100 be the correct number of tampons you would need? For context, this is 100 tampons. And it might not look like much on Earth, right? But consider how little space there is in a spacecraft. Consider how for every kilo it's about $5,000 more to send things into space, but also for every kilo of weight you add, you need to add 2/3 of a kilo of fuel to send it up. And it's this is overkill. This is too many. And this is what Sally Ride said. She was like, that would not be the right number. And they were like, so 200? And it just completely blows my mind that at no point when these engineers were thinking, tampons, did they ask a woman? They didn't say, how many would you need, Sally Ride? They said, 100? At no point did they ask a doctor or a biologist. Were they like, what is this menstruation? How does it work? Does it happen constantly? Can women turn it off? All questions that many American politicians should also ask their doctors. But these engineers just didn't think of it. They were like, 100, probably. And when she sort of said no, and they were like 200, and she was like, still wrong. They were like, well, we really want you to be safe. And she was like, 50 would be overkill. It is 7 days. I'm good. And there were a lot of beautiful stories of engineers just not understanding how to ask questions. And like, this is the sort of clearest example of like ignoring women in your histories and like not really asking them questions ever. So for a very long time, it was sort of assumed, and by assumed I mean assumed by male engineers, that if you got your period in space, you would get infected and probably die, because it wouldn't happen properly, and all of the endometrial lining would stay in your uterus and it would get infected and you would die. And if you ask most women, they will say, no, that's not correct. That's not right. In fact, this is recorded in a NASA-owned history. Ruth Seddon is talking about how like retrograde flow would definitely happen, like everything would just get back into your body, and then you would just, horrible things would occur, and the women were like, no, almost definitely not. Like this is not a thing. And it's really quite obvious when you think about it, because as anyone who gets menstrual cramps can tell you, like, menstrual cramps are terrible. They are essentially a miniature version of labour, pushing out the lining of one of your organs. You can still swallow in space. You can still menstruate in space. They sort of work on the same concept of like muscles push things around your body. So, it's alright. Which moves me on to my next point. The fact that if we're sending women to Mars, which we're going to, right? Like, I am fully on board with this. We can either send people like Valentina Tereshkova, who has probably passed menopause and so no longer has to worry about this. I say probably, I don't know her personally or intimately. But if we're sending women to Mars, we can't just do like this, a whole bunch. Trip to Mars and back will take like 3 years. That's like a lot more than 100 tampons that you would need, and you just don't even want to think about sanitary pads, right? Like, if we're going to be sending women to space and we're sending women away for that long and they don't want to menstruate, because it is a choice, and like arguably if I have chosen not to menstruate for like 5 years, and it is a good choice, my friends, we need to figure out a way to like assist them in that, right? Like, if you're going to Mars and you don't want to menstruate, there are many ways that you can prevent doing this. And I've already covered tampons, they wouldn't work. A moon cup is a little cup that you place inside of you to sort of catch the endometrial lining, and I don't even want to conceive of using that in zero gravity. Like, I've seen a lot of really cool videos of like Scott Hadfield like wringing flannels out in zero gravity. It's like, that's amazing. I don't even want to think about a moon cup in zero gravity. It is not going to be a good time. If you talk about the contraceptive pill, we have, oh man. So firstly, contraceptive pill on Earth goes off in about 3 years. Contraceptive pill in space would go off faster. That's just not the right things. Also, like, while they're smaller than tampons, if they ever come out of this packet, it's going to take a while. Oh, and 4. All right. This is 3 months. Contraceptive tablets. And again, it doesn't look like much, but you've got 3 years, you've got like 12 sets of these, a bit more. Quite heavy, and also a lot of them will probably go off, and you need more than that to be safe, right? So that's a lot, and when you consider, again, like $5,000 a kilo to send things to space, like, you want to be getting rid of as much as you possibly can. And when you send drugs to space, they're also going to go off, right? Like, drugs on Earth go off, and part of that is the fact that like drugs just kind of sit around and spontaneously degrade. I didn't do well at first year chemistry, so please ignore me if I say things that are lies about chemistry. But essentially, like, a lot of gamma radiation is going to make your drugs go off faster, right? So if you're sending a lot of the contraceptive pill into space, that is going to go off faster. And there's also issues where like some women don't respond particularly well to particular types. Some women, when they try and stop their menstruation from happening, just get 30 days of breakthrough bleeding, which is like also not something you want in space. Like, you don't want it on Earth. But like, breakthrough bleeding for 30 days in zero gravity is just horrible to conceive of. You've also got contraceptive rings, which I don't have an example of. But they're about this big, and you use one of them a month, so like 36 of those, right? That's a lot. And then we have the two options that are actually good. So these are things like the implant, which is a small bar that gets inserted in your arm back. Whoa! Inserted in your arm back here. And yeah, it's solid. It lasts for 3 years, give or take. And you have the Marina, or an intrauterine device. The Marina is my chosen brand. It is amazing. And so essentially these are the two options that women who are going on long-term space travel have for suppression of menstruation. And so on the left there you have the implant, and that's, that's about this big. The main concern with the implant is that while terrestrial women don't have problems with like the implant rubbing against literally everything they wear, when you're in space it's generally quite a different environment. You get orthostatic tension in your upper body, which means your entire upper body swells slightly. And then you also have to be wearing weird clothes, right? Like we don't casually wear spacesuits on Earth. We're not like, oh, look at my cool outfit today. I'm wearing my sweet EVA suit. But women in space do need to do that. And there's no research, although there is research upcoming, about the fact that like this might rub against your clothing, it might not be particularly comfortable, it could just not go well if you're in zero gravity. And then the one on the right is the Marina, and look how small that is. And that is 5 years without menstruating, which is such a gift. And the quote on the bottom is from my friend when she was at the nurse for her most recent checkup, and the nurse said, approximately when was your last period? And Fiona was like, approximately 8 years ago. I'm good. Just gonna keep suppressing that menstruating. And that's an amazing tool that we have if we're going to Mars. And like the way the Marina works doesn't rely on drugs particularly. The way Marina works doesn't rely on it just kind of sits inside your uterus and stops things from happening. And because it lasts for so long, it can be put in prior to astronaut training, and research can be done on whether it will be stable within it, because in some women the Marina isn't particularly stable and it will just fall out, which sounds like an entirely horrifying experience to me, and dear Lord, I am so glad it has not happened to me. So there's all kinds of cool physiological differences between humans, and some of the ones I know off the top of my head are women have greater risk of swelling in their upper body when they go to space, which can result in more pressure on the heart. They can have more problems when it comes to bone density when they come back to Earth particularly. But women also have they have no evidence of the visual acuity going down, so when astronauts go to space, they lose visual acuity, which is bad, and also no one understands why. So if you're sending someone to space and you want them to not go blind, it's probably quite good to send a woman. They don't go entirely blind, they just have severely decreased visual acuity. Women also don't suffer from the hearing loss that male astronauts get. And so those are really cool physiological differences. They're excellent, they're a fun time. But to take any one of those and say, well, then we should send no men to space ever again, that's a rubbish reason. That's such a ridiculous thing to do. And so we have all of these amazing women that are either in fiction or in reality have gone to space. We have people like Mae Jemison, Margaret Hamilton. We have people like Kau Prochalwa and Chiaki Miani and Sally Ride and Valentina Tereshkova that we can be talking about, and we can be saying, these are the people that we look up to, these are the people that we want to be. We're just gonna go to space, let's do it. Because we're gonna go to Mars. We're going to keep exploring outer space. This is something that drives us. You look up at the stars and you think, I want to go to there. We're going to keep going down this path. But in order to go down this path most successfully and in the best way for all of society, we need to do it in a way that includes everyone. To create the best future we possibly can, we have to include everyone in this path. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Sophia?
Yeah.
I thought that was a great presentation. I particularly liked how you mentioned that there are a lot of options for women, and it's really about breaking down a lot of these misconceptions. My question is how we break down the barrier to allow men to feel more comfortable with asking women these questions, especially the ones that you mentioned with regard to like menstruation or things like that can be quite uncomfortable to broach.
Yeah. So I think better sex education is the first place to start, eh? Like, if you just start talking about things and at a very young age and you just don't feel worried about like talking to children, I say children, I mean like 13 and 14 year olds, about menstruating, about wet dreams being another example of things that came up in our sex ed classes, about any of those things. If you talk about bodies like they're normal and nothing to be ashamed of, like that will go a really long way to sort of discussing that. I've never had any problems talking to random men I meet about my menstrual cycle, but then I also did a degree in biology, so I think it's frankly weird when people don't want to talk about like biology in a way that affects them. Yeah.
I guess just on that kind of point, that kind of solution is talking about educating children more, or school kids. If it is, people who are actually in that work environment now and don't necessarily want to change their way they think about that kind of stuff, how can you sort of influence that discourse? People who are already working in that environment, and that's really kind of, part of how that environment works.
Well, they need to want to change to start off with, right? So like, if they don't want to change, you need to first convince them that they actually do want to change secretly on some level. I think just discussing it more publicly as well is a really good thing. So like, I certainly wouldn't recommend what I do, which is bring up my menstrual cycle in conversation occasionally. But just talk about it like it's a normal thing. Talk about like, oh no, like I need to go and buy tampons. That's the thing I need to do this afternoon. Like, and while your colleagues or people you work with or people you interact with might initially be slightly awkward about it, like, they'll get used to it. They'll get cool with it. Like, and it's just something we all individually can do, is talk to people about the fact that people with uteruses menstruate. And I realise, like, accidentally throughout this entire talk, because NASA also does this, I've been referring to menstruation as being almost entirely a women-specific issue, and that's not correct. Not all women menstruate, not all women have uteruses, not all men don't have uteruses, but I just get indoctrinated when I read all of the NASA.gov stuff, and it's like, yes, all women do this. So apologies about that. But yeah, if you just sort of talk about it with people, like, and I think particularly, so I'm early 20s, and I think particularly early 20s is when a lot of problems with your reproductive organs come up, particularly for women. So you might get diagnosed with endometriosis, you might get diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and talking about things like that also serves to normalise like the normal bodily functions, and also how your bodily functions are messed up, because we do really need to talk about endometriosis more, because it affects like 1 in 7 women or something like that. And certainly if you're a dude or someone who doesn't menstruate and wants to know more about that, as long as you're respectful, as long as you're just like, I really want to know more about uteruses, please help, like to a friend, like that's certainly a conversation you can have. I think sometimes people who haven't experienced menstruation have difficulty discussing it in a respectful way because they're just kind of grossed out, and certainly I dated someone who made the comment several times that like, can't trust anything that bleeds for 5 days and doesn't die. I didn't date them for much longer. But you need to sort of overcome that barrier where people are like, oh, this is disgusting, because it's not disgusting. Like, half the world does it for a good, like, most of their lives, right? Like, we have to deal with this monthly between the age of 12, 13 and like 50-ish. Like, so it's not disgusting, it's just a thing that happens. It's like pooping. Right, I think we had a question. Yeah?
Yeah, I'll try and shout out.
Yeah.
Just want to ask you a question about role models. And you referred to some of the best ones come out of the space age so far. I'm wondering about the tension between the image of these women in the public domain as inspirations for girls, women to also aspire, as opposed to their own individual sense of privacy. I guess the question I'm asking is, how much do you feel the pioneers of some sort, like Jemison or Sally Ride or Valentina, have an obligation to speak to the public in that role model guise?
Yeah.
opposed to others perhaps just drawing on their experiences at a remove, given that they can just be competent, be professionals, and let that speak for itself?
So I think we should always sort of respect role models' sense of privacy. I know certainly that Sally Ride did not discuss.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, Sally Ride didn't discuss her relationship with a woman at any point during her life. She was incredibly private about it. She was also private about her marriage to a man earlier in her life. The reason that I sort of talk about her as a bisexual is because her partner, Tam O'Shaughnessy, I want to say, has come out and talked about it. And so, like, to an extent, because Sally Ride is no longer here to say, don't, like, because Tam has come out and talked about it, I feel comfortable discussing it in that fashion. I think it is unfortunate that there is not a section in the will that is like, do not talk about any of these things about my life ever, because I put, like, almost everything I did when I was a 15-year-old on that. I don't think they have an obligation. I think when you become a role model, you often develop the ability to do it, and you understand how much of a need there is for it. I think particularly these women, a lot of these women were the first in their fields, and they had no one to look up to. So they understand what the lack of that looks like. And so they, to an extent, may put that obligation on themselves. They may feel that they can fulfill a role, and that is something that they do. But I really do feel like we shouldn't put down anyone for not being a role model. So there are certainly women who have been to space who I could find very little on except for their names. And I think that's really important to respect and understand why someone might do that, because, like, while they are, like, spacefaring, amazing astronauts, they also just want to live their lives. They're people like us. And I think just remembering that even the most amazing role model you have is also a human, and they like having their own lives aside from their, like, public lives, is really important to that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a debate that goes on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
They get paid the same, female astronauts in space programs? Do you have any information about that?
I'm not actually sure. I didn't look that up. I mean, I would, like, punch everyone at NASA if they didn't. So just run through the entire NASA building, just like. I'm not sure. I would like to think that they do. A lot of what NASA does is public domain, and so that information is probably out there somewhere. And if they don't, I would encourage everyone to send angry emails to NASA. Yeah. Righty, that looks like it might be us.
Well, thank you very much, Sophia. It was really informative and really good. So join me in thanking everyone. And at 12 o'clock, we'll be having our next speaker, so make sure to be back by then.
Wow. Oh yeah, and if anyone wants, like, all of these tampons, like, I know they're expensive. I'm here for you guys. I don't menstruate anymore. Yep. Do you want 100 or do you want, like, 40 or?
I'll take one.
It's all good.
Good job, loved it.
Oh, thanks. Stuck to time as well.
I know,
Yeah,
very
well done.
efficient. So we got that.
Cool.
You got this as well.
Yeah, we're going to do a tag team, so this will be like dog and pony show, which I've never done before, and neither has Morgan, so we're going to be really quite interesting about this. I'm going to use this, I think.